Welcome to the August 4th edition of the PFF Forecast. This is an exquisite show because Josh Hermsmeyer is our guest. We love Josh. If you don't know who Josh is, this is your first time getting a little Josh Hermsmeyer in your life, you're in for an absolute treat. We talk about the Nick Chubb deal, but in a more macro level, like was that a good deal given the circumstances? Was it not? What do we think about paying running backs? And that expands to this conversation about parity in the league, the salary cap, what would happen if we didn't have one, what really causes parity, a whole host of things. We talk about whether he'd pay Lamar Jackson. And then he has a recommendation at the end. You want to stick around for that. I promise you this. Let's rock. We're going to get to Josh here in a quick second. And he was here with us for almost an hour, so I don't want to belabor the point, but holy fuck, Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he could really benefit from one of our sponsors, though.
Which one?
Well, when the coach is yelling at you, telling you to get vaccinated, sometimes maybe having too much hair in your ears.
Oh.
Causes a little bit of muffling.
That's not usually where I'm concerned about hair on my body, but
yeah, but the weed whacker, something I've used on my ears and nose.
Yeah, the nose is nice.
Yeah, the nose is nice for sure. A little tickle, kind of the tickle you might get if you're plucked with a vaccine. I don't know why
it actually doesn't.
I don't know why you would want to be, other than playing and earning the $35 million you're on the hook for.
I have no idea.
But yeah, the Manscaped Weed Whacker, highly recommend.
You're a big fan. It actually doesn't feel like you're getting a vaccine when you use it. I should just point that out.
Well, I've never gotten a vaccine in the nose before.
Right.
I actually never got a COVID test this entire time. But that is how, you sort of go up the nose there. So even if you want to be better at getting COVID tests, let's say you're an anti-vaxxer and you want you're Cole Beasley and you want the path of least resistance for the gal that comes up to your car and shoves that thing in your nose to see if you have COVID for the 17th straight day. The Weed Whacker from Manscaped.
I have used the Weed Whacker. I will not lie. I've been really keen on the Lawnmower 4.0. It has so far continued to pass my tests. I'm still using it.
How long is it? You talked about have you ever gotten to the point where the battery was low?
I have not so far.
Okay.
The battery,
but it would tell you if it did.
It would tell me if it did. And I found this out. It works in low light situations. It has a light on it. So you're in very good shape.
It's next to the thing that's supposed to work in low light situations.
Very good point. So by the way, you can get 20% off at manscaped.com with the promo code PFF. Go check it out. That's going to be the end of our Manscaped show. That was absolutely incredible. My quick takeaway from the past week, you've been on vacation. We haven't talked in about a week. I'm going to run you through what happened this week while you were gone. Do you want to hear?
Oh, I can't wait.
Okay. The 49ers have realized that they have the next generational talent at quarterback, and Trey Lance will be starting from week one. Carson Wentz had a broken foot when he showed up to Indianapolis, and shockingly, it has now been discovered, and he's not going to be playing for a long time. Neither is Quentin Nelson, and the Colts are going to suck. The Vikings, as you know, that's the one thing you followed along on your vacation, are a complete trash fire. Shocking. And
how does that team step on its dick in every single circumstance? What the?
I mean, it's absolutely sensational.
Their kicker, they signed a kicker who hasn't kicked since the 2019 AFC Championship game, and the guy, can't hit a kick.
You want to know how to get Eric worked up? Bring up the Minnesota Vikings. The other important things in the news is that my Chicago Bears Super Bowl futures look just absolutely delightful. Justin Fields just looks amazing when there's no pass rush. So those are all good things. We're going to get to Josh Hermsmeyer here in just 1 second. Before we do, quick reminder, it's fantasy football season. I don't know if you knew this, Eric, but if you head to pff.com for just $9.99 per month with the PFF Edge subscription, you get the fantasy football draft guide, the draft kit, that's always being added to and updated throughout the season. Player rankings and projections from all like 7 or 8 now of our analysts. I should know the total number because I've hired a couple new ones. We have a brand new analyst starting with us on Monday. I think Monday is the correct day. And he's an absolute rock star. So you'll get all of his content too, plus cheat sheets, all the fantasy stuff that you need.
DFS optimizer. We have the prices for week 1 that are displayed. You'll have access to that pretty soon here. Projections. Obviously the props tool.
Yeah, I mean, get an elite subscription because the props tool is going to absolutely cook you some dinner this year. And
by the way, tomorrow night
is the Hall of Fame game.
Yeah. Have you placed any wagers?
No.
Okay. Just asking.
I've not placed any wagers on the Hall of Fame game. I'm a purist. Okay. I'm going to bet on the games that teams are trying to win.
You're a moralist. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't you dare. Also check out Fantrax. Our good friends at Fantrax make it so much more enjoyable to host your leagues. Multi-team trades, player salary and contract options. It's just phenomenal. It allows you to do so many more cool things. Makes it more realistic, like the NFL, which is what you're looking for. And you can import all of your current league settings completely free. Sign up now at fantrax.com. Use the promo code PFF and get a chance to head out to Las Vegas to see the Raiders play for free. That's kind of a cool deal. So go to fantrax.com/PFF, the new home of fantasy sports. And now, our friend, Josh Hermsmeyer. It is about time that we have our good friend, probably Hall of Fame, Mount Rushmore guest, Mount Rushmore person, Josh Hermsmeyer at Frisco Josh on Twitter. He's got the avatar with the dude in the yellow suit that no one knows.
I actually watched that movie. I text Josh. I can't remember what it's like. A movie about like a town that had like a nuclear bomb or something. And it's this like group of people. It has that one dude from Arrested Development with what's his name?
I don't know, but this is off to a really hot start. Wait, hotter start, Josh. Before we started the podcast, we were talking about whether Josh was on team underwear or team free balling.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, so I'm not wearing any underwear right now. And I think that I understand your position, George, like, because my position right now is, very dangly, just like yours. But I think that if you're gonna, woo a woman and you're like in that moment and you're starting to strip and you're taking things off, like there needs to be an extra layer. You can't just drop trow and there's the business. Like, I think there needs to be one more step in that whole mating ritual. And even if it's like the 30th time you've done it, I still think that's true.
It's sort of like when you open like a Christmas gift, like there's always an intermediate layer. Isn't there not?
That was the analogy I needed. I'm just going to say, I respect your position. And I think the opposite.
George is the one who wraps the bear
you're right. I am
this reminds me of Jerry Maguire. Remember when he like is at the doorway with like his hand, like they're playing the jazz and it's just very awkward at the doorway, like that's kind of George when he's just suddenly naked. He's just suddenly naked.
That's definitely me. I choose freedom. Okay. I choose freedom.
Oh, geez.
So this is the point of the podcast where we talk about Kirk Cousins and Cole Beasley. No, actually, the goal of that was to transition into Nick Chubb. Somehow we ended up on the Cole Beasley, Kirk Cousins. I was thinking of introducing you, Josh, as the Cole Beasley of NFL analysts, but
wow. If only I could live up to that moniker.
Yeah. Because of your ability to go against the grain of the common man, you're very good at that.
Contrarian. I thought you guys actually already had the ultimate contrarian on staff in Kevin Cole. So I don't know that I can actually hold a candle to him.
Who's the ultimate contrarian?
Yeah, Kevin. Yeah. Kevin does think for himself, I think, really well. But you do as well. I don't know. What did you think? Like, so here's the thing. And this is sort of two people who disagree, right? Because Kevin on Twitter was talking about Nick Chubb's contract.
Yep.
And sort of like, I think he came from it from a perspective of this thing had to happen. And once it did, the Chubb contract, which is less than
conditional on, you have to sign him. That was his take. Now let's
on my joke. I was going to call it the half Chubb because it wasn't as big as
the good news,
McCaffrey or Zeke
the good news is that people who listen to this podcast have heard that joke 15 times. So we're in good shape. So let me set the table and let Josh kind of give his take here. 3 years, 36.6 million is the extension. 20 million of it are guaranteed, with potentially up to 30 million guaranteed, according to Schefter, but 20 million of it is certainly guaranteed. That's an average of 12.2 million a year, which is obviously way lower than the Gurley, Zeke Elliott, Christian McCaffrey contracts, all of which had upwards of 35 million guaranteed. Zeke got 50 million guaranteed, 48 million over his first 3 seasons. So that sets the table for it. Josh, take us through, for the people that weren't following on Twitter. What did you make of that contract? What was your reaction?
Well, I don't know that the right analysis is guaranteed, is my first point. I think the right way to consistently analyze NFL contracts under a salary cap is as a percentage of cap and relative to the median second-year contract. So I think that's the way you look at everything. And then I think that, like, but if that is the right way to look at contracts, and perhaps that's debatable, but I would say that sharp people I talk to, that's the way they do it. And so I think that, like, there's a big difference. And this is where I come down on Cleveland. Like, so before I get to the Chubb contract, I like to think about the overall environment and then the team that signed him and, like, why that might have happened, right? Because that's the interesting question. Like, if there was no cap, and maybe we'll talk about this later, but I think we will. If there was no cap, I wouldn't care what Chubb was paid, right? It would be irrelevant. Like, there would no longer be a constraint. Sign whomever you like at whatever you like, because it doesn't impact your other decisions. But we have a cap, and whom you sign at certain positions impacts who you can sign at others. They have Baker Mayfield, who they potentially might want to sign after this season if he crushes it, right, with optimal situation. And they have Hunt already under contract, and now they've signed Chubb. So what is going on in Cleveland? And this is the question I have. And I think that there's a really big difference between being a club with a lot of sharp people inside of it and being a sharp organization. And there's just a massive gulf between those two ideas, right? I mean, you're more likely to eke out sharp decisions here and there if you have a lot of smart people in an organization, but the lion's share of edge comes when you have someone who's sharp at the top driving things and the entire org buys in. And I just don't think that paying 2 running backs top 12 at this position is sharp. And I don't think that dedicating 6% of your cap to a single running back when the median second-year contract is 1.6% of the cap is a sharp organizational decision. So my question to you guys, where does that leave us with the Browns, if you agree with my analysis?
Yeah, there's a part of me that wonders about this, though, right? Like, I agree with you 100%, and I like the steadfast. Like, we can be happy for the player. We can understand where they're coming from. We can understand where the Browns are coming from, given the set of axioms they're living by, and still not like this. And that's okay. And still think Nick Chubb, for whatever it's worth, I don't actually think it's that much. You can think Nick Chubb is the best runner in football. There is a universe there's a universe where that's true. The one place where I wonder, and this is from thinking about things like Lamar's contract. This is about thinking, kind of all across, sports, is there Josh, do you believe that there's space to sort of make micro negative EV moves that have positive EV sort of externalities to them, that when you look at each individual decision, they don't make sense? But in sort of the same way, like when we used to talk to Zach, where he said, why do we run the ball? We run the ball because every once in a while I need a mental break, right? Like, it's a negative EV move, but it has, like, these externalities that we're not looking at. Is there, because I think
what you're saying is that this is less negative than it could have been.
Yes.
And that is a good thing.
It's sort of like if you're a sports bettor and you are, think about if you're a sports bettor and you're saying, I only bet positive EV plays. I only bet positive EV plays. And the World Cup comes on and your model says there's no positive EV plays. And part of the enjoyment part of the utility you derive from being a sports bettor is the enjoyment from sweating out games. And so
this is already horseshit because you don't have to bet. They have to play every game, right? So that's the argument, right? And I didn't mean to cut you off, Eric, but I just think one of the great joys of poker and betting and all the rest, and one of the biggest EV thing you can do is pick your spots, right?
Yeah.
Pick the game you sit down to for cards and pick your spots to bet. NFL teams don't have that luxury. Every year they got to play the games, right?
Yeah.
That's the argument. You have to play the games. But that still doesn't explain two running backs, top 12 at their position.
So
it doesn't. That is not organizationally sharp.
I'm not even like talking about necessarily this particular move, but like, let's say, for example, let's say for like the Ravens, for example, if the numbers come out and say Lamar might not be worth a $45 million deal, right?
Probably not worth a 45.
Yeah.
I mean, what? I'm sorry. I have a whole rant on Lamar, but go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just saying, is making the quote correct decision in that instance worth the utility of some of the things that can come from being an organization that rewards brilliant play? Like, I don't know.
So I think what you're saying, at least in the Lamar one, and I actually do really want to get to that, but I feel like that would be jumping ahead where this conversation still has a little more to go, which is that you are biting the bullet, like you're paying an extra whatever it is in order not to lose that player completely. And I think what you're saying is, well, there's a ton of evidence that losing that player completely does you very little harm, and you can get a guy that is 80-90% of that for 1.6%, I think is the number that you used of the cap, and have no problem with it. I would argue that you could just, draft a guy in the 4th round and you'd be just fine. Is what you're saying, Eric, then that like having Nick Chubb on your team or the fans knowing that you didn't let him go that's like the positive piece of the whole thing?
You might lose the opportunity. And again, some teams might not care about this, but you might lose the opportunity to be a place where free agents want to come if you are perceived as a place that does not reward great play. And again, like I said, I think the Chubb move is negative EV, but I'm wondering if there's any sort of argument.
Think that argument's even more horseshit than the first one.
And let me give you a perfect example of why that's horseshit. Justin Houston just signed for well below market with the Ravens, and they have not paid a running back. Would they pay $5 million a year? Like $5 million a year. And at the time it was 3.5% of the cap. Like
I'd say this. This is the bigger point, which is, first off, championships are not won in free agency in the NFL. They're won in the draft. And when you draft a good player and then you offer him the money, he's going to stay. Like, players are not going to look around and go, you know what? Should I not take this money that's in front of me because they didn't sign another guy like that one time?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of trying to play devil's advocate in the sense that I'm asking this question. Does making every single positive EV move independently add up to something less than the sum of, does that add up to something less than some sum of moves that are sort of broad where you allow for certain like bendings of the rule? The answer is probably no, but like, that's sort of that is like the argument that that's the argument implicitly that I think a lot of folks are making. And when you talk to people within the league, like, you're like, look, man, this is again what Josh is saying. You have really smart people working for teams, right? And you ask them these questions and you say, well, we can't trade player X because that would send this, like, the owner's never going to do this. And it's like,
well, that's the key point.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only point that needs to be said here. In my opinion, Josh, I think you're dead right. And I was going to ask you, like, how high up the chain do the smart people have to go? Because from my vantage point, it's the owner.
Yeah, I think it has to start with the owner, and he has to empower the decision maker, the ultimate decision maker is the GM, because he's going to weigh in. What a bunch of horseshit that owners don't actually put their thumb on the scale. Happens in every single draft room, which is the most consequential day of the year, the first day of the draft. It happens every year. So that absolutely has to happen from the top. And then the GM also has to inculcate this whole idea of this is the way we're going to do things. And it's hard, and it's never going to be uniform, and it's never going to be perfect, but it needs to start there. And even then you're going to dole out, bad decisions to people you like, because that's just how people work. Like, you reward hard work with suboptimal decision making. Like, I am not sitting here saying, no, we can't possibly ever make a suboptimal decision because it helps with a people problem. That's not my argument here. What I am saying, though, is that from the outside, how are we supposed to judge process? And when I look at Cleveland and what they've done, it's hugely problematic to me, because this is not a position where there's a lot of room for interpretation in terms of positional value.
So do you think with Cleveland then, because we praise them in free agency,
we've praised them pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bias there, because there's an issue with, and not a bias, I think, in like a negative sense. It's just that they have smart people. We sort of,
you want to root. It's not a problem to say you want to root for Andrew Berry and
Kevin
Kwesi
Stefanski and
Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah.
Yeah. The issue is like, so would you even say, like, because you said this, like, building through free agency is dumb. Like, there's not really it's just not a method. And so they get John Johnson for what we said is a reasonable deal, but safeties are a position that is random as hell. Like, is there really a ton of an edge in like not paying him Marcus May money and just paying him a little bit less? Like, when Anthony Harris can go for 1 year, $5 million, like, do we look at that and like gush over this and say, the minutia of it is, oh, well, he's an elite safety. Did we ever stop to think, well, the probability of being elite safety 1 year, given you were an elite safety the previous year, is not that high. Same for running backs. They look at the Troy Hill thing and like, oh, that's a nice complimentary corner. And did we look at the Clowney signing and say, well, yeah, for the Jadeveon Clowney, he's a former number 1 pick, 1 year, $8 million. Have we even looked at what Clowney's done recently? Like, there are a number of moves where
look at the Peppers. Look at the Peppers move for OBJ. Like, I think it was a process on process, great. But like, I also, as a lark last year, was like, Peppers is going to be the guy, right? I would take him. And he turned out to be really fucking good, like, at his position. Was that a bad process move? No. I think that's why it's so important. Like, pardon my dog. It's why it's so important, I think, to look at things from a process perspective, because when you start to like evaluate things based on outcomes, which everyone who's a football guy wants to do, you can really get lost in the weeds and say this was bad and this was good. And I'm saying, from a process move, I don't care how good Chubb was, right? I don't care how good White was at linebacker for Tampa Bay in one important game. Like, these are not relevant factors to me when you're looking at the big picture, which is, should you be spending large draft capital or big free agent money on these type of players at this position? And the sharp answer is no.
Mm-hmm. So so I guess my first question is, do you think that we have been too kind to the moves that the Browns have made because of Andrew Berry? And is this like the very poignant case of that happening? Is that why
I don't think that, like Eric said the same thing, like, PFF is not a monolith, right? And I think one of the great things about PFF is the diversity of opinion, because at that point, by the time something gets published, I assume it's gone through a bit of a gauntlet and people have had weighed in. There's been lots of opinions thrown at the thing, or maybe not. But in any event, you will get opinions from Twitter. And the fact that there are differing opinions coming out of PFF is a strength of your organization. So I don't like painting is a little difficult if we're discussing PFF in particular.
Not as PFF, but as like the general tone in the football world, including, I think, a lot of people who do math with football, is,
and then I would say that's fair. I think there's
what I was talking about.
Strong analytics bias towards Harvard GMs.
Yes. And I think that was the case. So I tweeted out very tongue in cheek that we should hand Andrew Berry the executive of the year because he didn't pay Nick Chubb as much as the other guys. And I was trying to kind of illustrate something, which is what I think one of the reasons that there are so many differing opinions and why, for example, the news piece that PFF put out talked about how the contract was of a lower value. It had kind of it was a part of this resetting of the RB market because there was that is a step in the right direction. And so people want to look at that trend or that, look at the derivative and go, oh, it's negative. People are moving back. Eventually, we're going to get to the right place. It's a sign of hope, right? It's a smaller negative, and that should be praised. And then there's also a group of people who I think look at it probably as it was, Josh, where Andrew Berry wasn't making this decision. He was told, you're going to re-sign Nick Chubb. I want Nick Chubb on this team. Go make it happen. That's
or maybe it wasn't a complete directive, but it was him reading the room in a way that Sashi was unable to, which I actually fault Sashi for. I don't think he was a good manager or a good reader of the room. And I think maybe I mean, I don't know any of this. This is all speculation, but I can imagine a world where he's like, look, my coaches love that we have these two running backs. Mm-hmm. It will make them happy if I can continue to keep these guys on the team. It may not be, positive EV in terms of like the position value and what we're paying them, but it will be positive EV for my career and for my harmonious relationships and my ability to manage this team and to further it to the future. So in a particular environment, I can understand that type of decision making, but again, that gets back to that's not a great organization. Like that's not a sharp organization. That's an organization where sharp people are bending to the will of poor thinking. And I mean, fine, you want to call it reality or whatever. I'm just saying that reality sucks. I want a reality where people are thinking correctly about how to win football games.
Okay. So let me ask you this, because I too want to live in a utopia. California or Cabo or something like that. But no. This is because I get it. We can sit here and idealize what having 50 people and we just talked about this from PFF's perspective, right? Like having 50 people that are all in sync on what the positive EV move is at every step of the way. Is that even a realistic thing to think about? Like that isn't ever going to happen.
But you said, like, I think, so we have Brad, who I think has increased our understanding of the minutia of contracts to a degree where we're talking intelligently about them. But it in the case of the Chubb contract, it came at the expense of a point of view that's different than ours, right? Like that's essentially what Josh is saying, where it's like when we wrote the article about Dalvin Cook last year, and that was what was pointed out, which was,
yeah, but I actually don't give a fuck about, sorry for swearing. I'm not really talking about like one article. I'm talking about like, no one cares about the article. I'm talking about like this conversation about Nick Chubb and like what the Browns organization could have possibly done. And you're Andrew Berry, Josh. What are you doing?
Yeah. And that's the question. Like, I don't want to assume I know everything he knows or that I feel the pressures that he felt. But what my broader point is, a good organization would foster an environment where the GM could make positional value decisions that are correct. And this is the easiest thing to get right in all of football. We cannot rank correctly within positions, right? We're terrible at that. Like no one knows who's a good quarterback. Like, I mean, I don't care what you say. Like I have some models I think might help a little weed out the bad ones. And I think I might be able to say this guy is really going to be good. But like when we talk about in terms of positional rankings, we're just horrible in general. But what we can say with a pretty reasonable degree of certainty is that this position is more valuable than another. And so to make mistakes at that level bespeaks something else, right? And that's my entire point.
Yeah, it's the same thing as the trade down in the draft. Like we're really bad at we're really bad at picking players, but what we do know pretty well is if you add picks X and Y, it's greater than the value of picks Z, right? So that is a decision where you can take out a lot of you can take out not only the noise, the uncertainty that comes from noise. You can take out the uncertainty that comes from your ability to understand the world, right? Like that to me, Josh is making a good point here. I do think it's interesting, right? Because like what you just described, Josh, which is I'm reading the room. I don't even take a directive from the owner. I know that this is something that if I took a stand on it, it would be, the owner would be like, hey, what the hell? And then I would have to explain myself in a way that he's not going to understand. And like he's saying, oh, what's $12 million APY for 3 years? And I think that there's some utility to that is separate from winning games and hence is overvalued, right? Like that's what you're saying. Like it does not help you win games. It has utility.
It's organizational overhead
with which the job of a GM occurs, right?
So what would you have done?
I mean, the issue is
like, would you have fought that battle? Because I think
I would have made an environment where that battle doesn't happen.
So are you saying that you walk in to get the job and you say, you sit down with Haslam, you sit down with Deep Testa. Deep Testa probably agrees with you, right? So you're sitting down with the owner, right? And you go, here's how it's going to go. And you lay it all out there and you go, you have your big presentation. At the end of it, the guy looks at you and goes, are you fucking kidding me? I'm supposed to hire this guy? Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, but I mean, there's an issue with that though, right? Because, Josh,
there's two things here, right? Like first of all, being a GM in the NFL is a lottery ticket. So turning down a lottery ticket is just dumb,
right?
So there's the first part of it. The second part is do you want to be a good GM? Do you want to be a good GM? And so if you're Ballard, you kind of had a couple choices, and I thought he picked wisely. It turned out to be unlucky.
Yeah.
But like, I think it's a lot like also choosing your table at poker. Like if you have, if you're that good, right, and you've won the lottery, but you could also choose your table, then that's the perfect place to be. And what I would suggest is that, then you choose the table where, the environment won't be that you're fighting your owner about paying running backs 10% of the cap. Like that
exist.
I think it does exist, but it's rare.
Where?
Like, I think if you were in the right place at the right time, you could probably have gotten Tepper to think that way. I think that you could probably get people in Buffalo to think that way. You could probably get people, if they're not too busy trying to sell everything or recapitalize, and then or you might be able to get people in Miami to think that way. I might have repeated myself.
And I think like there's clearly, the hard part is that even us and the three of us who I think have been at the tip of the spear in many ways in terms of understanding analytics in football, like I think we have great intuition about a lot of these things, but I do think that our tools need to give, like, for example, like we talked about on the last 2 podcasts ago, we talked about surplus value. Mm-hmm. Like I look at like Kareem Hunt last season, if you take WAR and transfer it to dollars, was worth about $6 million last year. So I can make the case that his deal was fine. When I go and say, look, Nick Chubb, it was almost a 0.2 WAR player last year, but 0.2 WAR makes for you, 1/5, so $9 million. He is a $9 million player at his best. And so you're going to pay him 12 a year. I don't care what the market is. The market is Derrick Henry last season at 0.25 WAR or whatever was worth, basically exactly what he made. And he's making a mega running back contract. Like, I feel like are we just not confident enough in our own, like, that we've taken our intuition and brought it to its sort of rigorous conclusion? I know certain teams are, like, when I talk to certain teams and they're like, oh, we got 3% surplus value on this trade. And it's like, okay, this team, like, but I do feel like if we had better tools, Josh, if I came to an owner and said, look, when you sign Nick Chubb to $12 million a year, you are on average, or actually, no, at best in this case, giving up $3 million a year. I think that's a much more compelling argument that I don't like paying running backs.
Well, here's the problem. If I drafted Patrick Mahomes and I made that argument, it might win. If I haven't, don't think you win. And that's just how it is right now. And did anything other than luck lead you to drafting Patrick Mahomes? Probably not. But you need that on your resume before people are going to listen to the rest. So at some point, someone needs to have some success, luck, and then have the ability to influence an organization to the extent that, and I mean, I think there's some that are doing this, but I just mean, if we want to see this spread, they have to have the ability to have a large influence on how an organization is structured. And then on top of that, they need to get lucky and win in the playoffs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, was that
at the end of the day, though, I honestly don't care like so much. Like the people I like in this business are having the success they're having, and they're enjoying their edges and whatever. Like, so I don't, it's not that I want this to spread so much. It's just that I think it's important for us who are interested in what's right and true and whatever, and like sharp, to like really understand, how that might work.
I guess I would probably push back on the idea that any organization, I don't think there's an organization in the NFL that wouldn't have signed Nick Chubb, wouldn't have extended it. I don't think that exists.
So who are the teams that are the least likely to have? I do agree. I think Buffalo might have let him go.
No, there's no chance.
I think
no chance in hell.
The Ravens did just go linebacker, running back in the first 2 rounds.
Yes,
J.K. Dobbins has 2 good seasons and he'll get the same fucking contract.
I mean, I'll say this about Baltimore. They've made some tough decisions. They've successfully made some tough decisions.
Who?
I mean, Judon.
I have lots of hold on. Let's put that part to bed. I have lots of problems with Baltimore's
Matt Judon is an example of that
2020 draft. It was not good.
Yeah, the 2020 draft, yeah, sure.
95.
It was there was lots of bad moves there. But again, I am not on the team. Like, this is not, they're not my team. But overall, do they make relatively good decisions? Yeah. Like, do I think they would have signed Nick Chubb to that deal? It's possible, but I know that there would be lots of fight internally over a decision like that.
The Orlando Browns.
And I have to imagine that same fight happened in Cleveland. If it didn't, then we have some real misapprehensions about the folks.
That would be fascinating to know. I would be somehow, some way, maybe it never comes out on a podcast, but we got to find out what that is. Cause I think that's a good point. Like, how it went down tells you so much about the situation, about how to grade the people in it, because I can't fault Andrew Berry for doing something that, was minus EV, but is he probably pretty confident that Nick Chubb will have like a good season this year?
Right.
Like, and
right.
It's not like
it is such a low risk move for him.
Right.
Like, in his situation, it's hugely low risk, and because I cannot fault it.
I almost look at it and I go, I wonder, because I do want to talk about Lamar, and this maybe is a good segue. I wonder if Andrew Berry was sitting there and said, look, I'm reading the room. I know ownership wants this guy. I look at the fan base. The fan base is going to have like a conniption if we don't, extend this guy. And I'm not going to fight this battle. You know what the battle I want to be able to fight is, though? The Baker Mayfield one. Because as much as Nick Chubb, as much as overpaying a running back here matters, if you fuck up the quarterback decision, no, none of this matters, right? And I don't have a ton of confidence that that's actually the case, but I could see a situation where you're like, look, I'm going to pick my battles, and this ain't the one.
Yeah, and I think if that is what's going on, then okay. But we don't have, that knowledge, or at least I don't. And all I can do is look at what we have. And I was asked to analyze the Chubb deal, and so I did. But like taking a larger view, as you've asked, this isn't a condemnation of Andrew Berry's management. Like he's under pressures that I have no idea about. Like he needs to, as a boss, you literally need to answer to your employees. Like some people have a misapprehension about that too. No, if you value the people that you've hired, you owe them in a certain way. Like you're not just some dictator up on high. And so they have given him their feedback. His coaching staff has given him, like, we won last year and you want us to continue to win. We need these guys. Like if that's the feedback he's getting, if ownership is kind of listening in and nodding along with all that, like Stefanski's the coach of the year, you're not going to listen. Like, of course he's in a pickle. But again, that's an organizational issue. Like, and this is why I try and get back to this. Like you can have lots of really smart people in a building and have a suboptimal organization.
Yeah. It's interesting. And like whether the utopian organization can exist. And for my money, it's not about that. You're never going to get that. You're never going to get all the coaches. You're not going to get all the people that matter in an organization to feel, that this is the right move. It all comes down to an owner. If you have a billionaire owner, and we're going to talk about parity here in a second, you have a guy worth $10 billion and he believes in analytics and he buys a team, then you'll see this shit happen.
I was reading a book about soccer the other day. They said we should not grade soccer players on the tackles they make, because if you have to make a tackle, you've already fucked up. I do think that there's an aspect of this where if you have to go to your owner to defend a move not to sign Nick Chubb, there's already a disconnect that might be insurmountable, right? Like I think that's where I'll say, from Josh's point of view, which I think is spot on. Like the whole thing has to be everybody from, and it's a difference. The evaluators, right? The evaluators might have a different worldview, but the decision makers sort of have to have a similar sort of point of view.
So let's transition here. We spent a lot of time on that. I want to ask you what you think of Lamar, and you said you had a lot of takes there. I kind of want to.
Well, I have one take.
One take, whatever it is. One take to rule them all. I want to hear it.
So I think that people underplay, or they miscalculate perhaps the probability that Lamar and people like Allen have already had their best seasons, and they're going to pay them on that upside. And there's nothing else you can do. So this is where I'm completely on board with folks who are willing to take big risks on and pay and overpay, perhaps. Like you say, $45 million for Lamar, and you say that's an overpay. I would not disagree, but I'll say you have to do it. This is where that whole argument about Chubb, well, no one wouldn't sign Chubb. Well, no one wouldn't sign Lamar, right? And this is that instance where the market and what you're willing to pay, they meet. And expectation and risk and everything comes into play, and you just go, it's the most important position. The possibility of him reaching his ceiling again in a certain season and pushing you all the way to a championship is non-zero. And maybe we're overweighting the chances that he will do it again, but at the same time, we know he's done it, so you have to pay. And so I guess my point, the hot take is that, like, I think he's probably going to be overpaid, but I still think you have to do it. So this is where this whole argument we've had about Chubb, I think, absolutely applies to quarterbacks and people like Lamar in particular, who have shown they have an MVP in them.
So you would pay Lamar $45, say even $50 million a year, it might get to that point. You would do that. You wouldn't bat an eye on it.
Well, I would bat an eye. Like, that's the point. Like, my butt would pucker really fucking tight because I think you're probably doing the wrong thing in terms of surplus value, but I don't think you have a choice at that position.
And that's because of positional scarcity. That's
because you do not see quarterbacks with that upside come around. And so, the chances of it happening again, like I think it's probably the case that 2019 was, a very special year. And the fact that Baltimore was unable to win it all is really lamentable for that team. They had a lot going for them, and they had taken the league by surprise in a lot of ways. They had the right coach at the right time with the right player at quarterback. And I think guys like Roman have shown themselves to not be adaptable in the way you might hope. And I think players like Lamar have shown themselves to not be adaptable in the way you might hope. And so you really need to strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah. I think the other aspect of this is, for I think almost every other position, the median is what matters, right? You like sort of compare medians and all that kind of stuff. I think with quarterback, Josh is really talking about the probability of being good enough to win a Super Bowl,
right,
with the team on your back, which is, I think, a skill held by only a handful of quarterbacks. Like,
you shoot your shot there, because if you don't, having a median quarterback, what does that do for you? It doesn't do shit for you. And the Broncos are going to find that out this year, probably, right? Yeah. Like, and the Vikings have found that out for a while.
Yeah. Right, I mean, every team is like, there's two types of teams. There's a team that can win because their quarterback is on a rookie deal. And then there's a team that can win because their quarterback overcomes everything else. And Lamar has such a unique skill set that he can. Of course, like, the issue that with the Ravens, Josh, I wonder if you agree with this, is that the Ravens for the last 20 years as a franchise, more or less, have been a great team. The 50th percentile for the Ravens is an amazing football team. And the hard part is that, and they've had it twice, so that's great. But the hard part is Lamar. I think Lamar lengthens the distribution while maybe possibly decreasing the median. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure. I guess my take is maybe not so much about the distribution and more about how you value the entire area under the curve. And like, I think even given a knowledge of what the true distribution is, it's probably going to be overvalued. And that's my problem, like, if in an analytical sense. But I still don't think it's a problem, like in terms of decision making.
Let's talk about parity here for a second, because this was another part of your. You went on Twitter and just like took the Tesla flamethrower out and just went after it, which is one of the best parts about Josh, is that there's no filter. It's beautiful.
I was laying on the beach watching.
That's
the whole time.
I don't. We've already talked about, I guess, not wearing underwear, so like, I can't give you shit for the site, but whatever.
I wasn't wearing underwear.
Good. Does the salary cap increase the parity in the NFL?
All right. So first, what's parity? I think it's about winners. Like, who wins? Like,
yeah.
What does that group of winners look like? Does it change? Is it static? Do we see most teams make the playoffs every 20 years across the league? Do most teams win at least maybe one playoff game every 20 years?
Yeah, I guess the way I would define it, and Eric, you jump in here, but the way I would define it is the kind of ability with which to jump into the 85th percentile, right? What does that group of 85th percentile teams look like? Is it always the same? Is it always the fucking Yankees and the Red Sox? Or do you get, a nice mishmash of teams in there?
Yeah. So Josh knows this already, because like we messaged back and forth about this. It's so interesting, right? Because if you define parity, I think the way that a lot of people would, but maybe how a lot of people think of it, right? A lot of people think about parity as what's the likelihood my dog shit team is going to be relevant every so often, right? And from that perspective, and we did this, if you look at pff.com, I did an article like 3-4 months ago about the likelihood of staying elite, the likelihood of staying poor, the likelihood of, and I looked at different eras. I looked at basically the pre-free agency post Seattle, Tampa Bay expansion. And then I looked at, basically the Carolina, Jacksonville expansion until realignment. Then I looked at realignment to the CBA, and I looked at CBA till now. So that, they're broad, but you can defend them. And what's interesting is that in that earliest phase, more teams in the stable stage distribution were elite than they were in the intermediate two. But that percentage is the exact same as it is now. So the teams that stay in sort of that, and I define it as, in the preseason, you are 2 points better than the average team on a neutral field, which is actually not that easy because everything regresses in the preseason. So you're coming into the season truly elite. Over 27% of the teams in the NFL in the current alignment do that. And that's how they did it back when Josh's 49ers were winning 4 Super Bowls.
Our 49ers, Josh.
And that to me is exactly what Josh is talking about, which is that after a while, the cap was a jarring thing, but after a while, some of these teams have optimized for it, and there's a very clear way to optimize for it. And the reason it's so easy is precisely because of the cap. The cap, in many ways, makes it easy to be a dynasty because you can't pay the most valuable player on your team enough money because of things like the franchise tag and things like that. The one place where you do see parity, if you define it differently, is the percentage of teams that are 2 points below average on a neutral field than the average team. So that number has steadily decreased about 4 or 5% not 4 or 5% each time, but from that first phase, there are a lot more just consistently terrible teams. Think about the Atlanta Falcons in the 80s, stuff like that. Nowadays, only 20% of teams are consistently in that sort of range. So I think that's how people view parity, even though when you ask them to define it, they really mean what Josh means.
Yeah. So I guess my take is about, as you said, the latter. I think whenever anyone talks about parity, or they write articles on parity, they compare it across sports or whatever you might have. They're talking about what is the chance that my team is going to be one of the good ones this year and win a playoff game and give me hope. That's the feeling of parity, right? Give me a 20-year span of a league. How often am I feeling pretty good about my team, no matter where I'm located in the league? And so my take is there's no evidence that the NFL salary cap impacts that. And the NFL used to not have a salary cap, and that's the important point here. It's we have a before and after picture of the NFL that we can look at. And if after the cap was instituted, we can observe, more division winners as a percentage of the league, or a lack of dynasties, boy, that would be interesting. Things like that, then I think we would have some solid evidence for the case that the cap was impacting parity, but that's not what we find, right? So the cap couldn't prevent the greatest dynasty in the history of the NFL, right? The Patriots won a quarter of the Super Bowls since the cap was instituted. Did I lose you?
No, you're good. You're good.
I said something stupid because I wasn't thinking, but yeah.
But the Patriots are just under a quarter of the Super Bowls since the cap was instituted. That's wild, right? So the percentage of teams that have won multiple divisions over the last 8 years is roughly the same pre and post cap. So if you look at 8-year buckets, roughly the same. And that's according to work done by Jason Fitzgerald. So I think given that evidence, if your claim is that the cap creates parity, there's a causal link, then I think you have some heavy lifting to do. And I think that it's conservative and humble thing to say. It is that, we don't know, or we have no way to know one way or the other. We just don't have any idea.
So I think this is because I agree. I think I agree with both of you, which is such a lame thing to say, but and you guys don't technically disagree on a lot of this. I don't think, but to me, it's a function of the way that football is played and what matters in football. The quarterback. We just talked about it. So if you think that drafting quarterback, this is what I would argue, Josh. If there was no salary cap and instead of a draft, you were just auctioning off players to the highest bidder, well, then it would matter a fucking lot.
That would.
Parity is in the draft because bad teams always pick at the top. They are always taking chances on getting great quarterbacks, but those quarterbacks aren't going anywhere.
Well, they don't have long lasting dynasty. Who are the quarterbacks in these dynasty teams? They're like almost over half of them are carryovers from a previous CBA.
But they're also, there's no transition for when a good quarterback goes to a team, he's not going anywhere else.
No, that's the thing, right? And to your point, like different sports probably react differently to a salary cap. I don't know this for certain because I only really follow football, but it makes sense. And it's because of the unique features of each league. And like, so it wasn't just the salary cap in 1994 that the NFL added. It was also the first year that a bunch of new pass-friendly rules were implemented, right? That the league was really trying to stop kicking field goals. If you remember, Len Pasquarelli, he literally called the NFL the National Field Goal League in 1993. Like, it was a wildly different game.
They moved the kickoff back from the 35-yard line to the 30-yard line in 1994 to try to get more kick returns and to try to get more scoring. The league in 93 was boring as hell. And yes, and they put in the 2-point conversion in 1994, which also created more close games.
No chucking downfield. Like, it was
Minnesota Vikings in 94, 95 combined played like 8 overtime games. Like the institution of the 2-point conversion completely changed the game of football in a weird way. But you're right, Josh. And that's what makes it so hard. The other thing that also happened was there were 2 new teams added to the NFL. There were 4 new teams added to the NFL in a carry the 2, like 7-8 year stretch, right? And that, I mean, you're talking about 4 out of 32. That's like a humongous fraction of the league. Like you're lowering the talent pool there. And again, like, and you made winning the Super Bowl even more of a winner take all fat tail event. Right. And like, I don't know. Like,
yeah. So I guess the couple questions that I have are like, do we need more parity in the league?
If it comes at the expense of scoring and passing, no.
Well, we always I guess it's the same question. It's like, is more parity what people think of it as? Like, I think the ultimate parity in sports is the NCAA tournament where just like shit happens. You have players that are like, there's only a few good players playing in college basketball and they're not even very good. And it's just like, people just throwing up prayers and shit goes in, shit doesn't. And like
good fundamental basketball.
Yeah, shit happens. And that's parity. And people see that as fun, right? The madness. That I think is what like ultimate-ish parity would look like. Does that actually make the NFL more fun? Would that be what we would get out of it?
Well, if there was, like, okay, so there are certain things we know about football and certain things we don't. Like, but one of the things we do know is that elite QBs move the needle. Like, if an elite edge rusher goes out, the line doesn't move, right? If Aaron Rodgers is, play in a game is going to be uncertain, like they don't know if he's going to play or not. It's not that the line moves or not. It's that they take it off the board. Like elite QBs are the thing. And the cap does not affect elite QB distribution or supply. So it's not a surprise that the cap, or we might find in our observation, that the cap doesn't actually, when it went on or off, doesn't actually impact outcomes in the way we might expect. Like, that's not surprising given what we know about the game of football. And so I think, like, if you want to, like, make more parity, but not like go back to when it was the National Field Goal League, then I think the best way to do that would be to somehow make it easier for elite QBs to move teams. And that's a rough suggestion for a lot of people. Another way to do it is to, really just get rid of the draft. I don't think that is tenable. The draft is, I mean, frankly, it's anti-American, but like beyond all that, like, it's just, what it does is it captures the best young talent for 5 years in a way that they never actually get let go if they're any good. And so that if you do get lucky and you get a franchise QB, he's sticking around for a while. Like, look at the only two notable elite QBs to move were like Tom Brady, the dust of Tom Brady. And he still won a championship when he went to Tampa Bay after 20 years with the Patriots. And then there was, the shuddering hulk of Peyton Manning, who was like had a neck injury they thought was going to doom him for the rest of his career. And he went on, he still won a championship throwing flutter balls to the out patterns. Like, I think that like elite QBs are so valuable that they're just never going to come on the market under the current system. And so, the cap just isn't, if the cap can't impact the QB market, the elite QB market, then, I don't think our prior should be that it will impact parity.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I actually don't think, I also think getting rid of the draft might make there less. It's all about how many there are, right? And like the timing of when they show up, because there are going to be certain teams that are going to be more attractive. They're going to have more money. But if they already have a guy, so like Patrick Mahomes comes up and he's a free agent, right? And like which team goes and signs him, but he also went at pick number 10. So like that's, to me, there's still a kind of, you're getting a little bit of a distribution of those quarterbacks, and that's what matters. But I certainly don't think that that making there no salary cap achieves parity. What I do think it would do is make it less fun. The salary cap is this wonky set of rules, right? It's like when you have a game that you enjoy playing, and the reason you enjoy playing it is because the rules make it challenging, right? It's like board games. Right? You got to read the rules, and it makes it more fun. When you just have teams like in baseball, when the Yankees just go out and pay some guy some number that you can't even comprehend, and you have no idea like what the 90th percentile or 99th percentile of what they can pay is, and you're just like, this isn't fun. It's stupid. So
I agree selfishly, but there's a cost to this, and that's to the players. They're not getting what they're worth. And I think that is worth when you're talking about a rule that I think we charitably can say we really don't know the impact of, right? The cap, if our ultimate goal is parity, right? And the cap is our method to achieve it. And the evidence suggests that we really don't know the effect that it's having. And the cost is real and knowable, that you're putting a ceiling on the very best players in the game, and they're not getting paid what they're actually worth. I think it's a no-brainer. And I agree with you, like from a nerdy, like outsider, doesn't really impact me, no skin in the game perspective. Like the game is more interesting when you have this constraint, but like, that's not fair to the players.
Oh yeah. From a what's fair perspective, 1000%. Like, yeah, of course. It's going to be hard though. You're going to get, my favorite thing is the people who go, well, look, they get paid enough.
The counterfactual, actually, in my opinion, so the way owners are, I still think if you took away the salary cap in the NFL, you would still sort of get the parity that's elicited by the current cap, which is if you don't have one of those great,
exactly, it's still all about the
brilliant quarterbacks are a bargain. Kirk Cousins quarterbacks are not. And so the fact that like Mahomes would make $100 million a year would make the incentive to go back into the draft and try to get a rookie quarterback the same or higher than they are now, right? Because you don't want to have to pay Kirk fucking Cousins $60 million a year, right? So like and the team that gets Mahomes for $100 million is still getting a bargain probably. And so to me, the pressures that gave rise to some of what we would consider parity, or what we believe would result in parity, would still be there. And what I think is is still kind of neat about the league, which is like you're just in a game of like, next up, you're next up. You're trying to give the quarterback a rose, and only like a handful of these guys get roses.
The tough thing is that I think it would. I don't know that the way that we've quantified parity would actually change, but I do think you would see certain teams either really struggle to get that guy. Like I'm thinking about your Chiefs. Who the fuck is choosing to go to the Chiefs? You know, like, okay, they have Andy Reid and that's great. Like there are a lot more attractive places to go, right? And more wealthy owners. Good. Exactly. Right. Like I'm not going to the place for the barbecue. And you look at like just what happened in the NBA, like the Bucks and the Hawks played. If everyone were if there was no draft, that's not happening.
I seem to remember the preacher, Reggie White, choosing to go to Green Bay.
Yeah, he was the first big free agent signing. Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, I feel like, so there's two things. So I think when you're thinking about it in terms of like, what will teams spend, right? I think winning is like so far down the list for a team owner. And I know that sounds strange and maybe I need to like, unpack this, but the truth of it is what they really want to do. Their first inclination is tax avoidance, right? And because of how wacky things are in the US, you can actually depreciate player salaries. So if you have a situation where you have a year where you are able to pay a lot in terms of cash flow, like that's fine for you. That's fine for your organization. Then I don't think an owner has any problem with spending a lot that year. And if, they had some lean years in terms of cap or, it's not even cap anymore in terms of total player outlay, then I think, they make up for it in future years, because at the end of the day, what they're optimizing for is tax avoidance. After that, is the league healthy? And then after that is my team appreciating. Fourth, in my opinion, is, are we any good? And like, I don't think that changes whether you have a cap or not. I don't think that matrix, I don't think that flow chart of decision-making for an owner changes one bit, whether or not there's a cap. So, I mean, and unless you're contending with that fundamental set of pressures for an owner, like you're incorporating them in your analysis, I don't think you're going to come to the right conclusions about whether or not a cap is going to affect parity.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's also interesting to look at how wealthy the current owners are. And most of the teams in the league would be just fine. But the Raiders, Mark Davis's net worth is like less than 300 million. It might be up to 300 million now. Like they're not going to have too great of a time in this free market economy. The Lions would probably be in a little bit of trouble. Those are the only two teams I think with owners who have a net worth below $1 billion.
But the cool thing, and this is what Josh pointed out. I mean, we saw the Royals make 2 straight World Series and win one. The Twins, they suck, but like they've been in like the playoff hunt. They historically have, despite being pretty cheap. Obviously, the Oakland A's have had, and the Tampa Bay Rays.
But that's a draft, and the difference in those two sports are massive.
Yeah, I can't argue about baseball. I honestly,
but the ability to pay your best players an unlimited amount of money, that question mark is still there, right? Like, so I agree with you that like all the fundamentals are not the same, but the real issue for somebody like Mark Davis would be because you'd have some sort of revenue sharing. You have revenue sharing in baseball, like you would have some sort of revenue sharing, but it would be
the luxury tax.
It would be the spending the $100 million on a quarterback, and some teams simply can't do that, and other teams can't. Like, there was always like obviously Moneyball's the sort of interesting one, but like they couldn't even pay $8 million to Johnny Damon,
right?
Eric, how interesting would it be to have a league, right, where look, there is a finite number of elite quarterbacks, and the number of it shrinks and grows through each era. But how interesting would it be to have a team who was sharp, who didn't have or couldn't get an elite quarterback because they couldn't afford it, build a team through all just over investing in all these weak link position groups and try and build a great defense and a great O-line to take out that elite quarterback? How interesting would it be to see that happen in the NFL? You just can't do that under the current cap.
Josh, are you familiar with the Denver Broncos?
No. I mean, I mean, that's sort of what the Ravens were thinking about doing before Lamar became elite. Right, Greg? That's kind of how
I feel like that's what they were doing when they had Lamar and right? It's that is.
But you're right. I mean, you're right. Like the interesting thing, and I think this is why I appreciate your point of view so much, Josh, is that we get in this rut where we're looking at the games and the games within the games and the games within the games within the games. And sometimes it's important to step back and evaluate. Like it's just a fun thing to like evaluate and think to yourself, well, like what happens if X didn't exist? How would things evolve?
Well, we'd be arguing not about whether Nick Chubb was overpaid, but why it was so stupid to pay him 10x what this other position was making. That would be the change. We'd have to shift our consternations. So we have one last thing. We do this with every guest. I'm really excited for this one. Okay. Because you
man of culture.
You're going to knock it out of the park here, Josh. We do a segment every Wednesday or every Sunday. Eric and I give a recommendation to the people, ranges from food to podcasts to books to whatever the hell it is, workout routines, wearing underwear, not wearing underwear. And every Wednesday when we have a guest on, we ask them to give us a recommendation. So Joshua, what is your recommendation for the people?
So this needs to be a recommendation that most people listening can actually avail themselves of. It can't be local.
This is how you know it's going to be good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm having trouble. So there's a gentleman on Twitter, and I can't remember his name, but he sent me some of his homemade bottle, but it's actually a business, Bottle Rocket hot sauce. And he had a ghost pepper hot sauce. And I put that nonsense on my chicken tacos and on my burger and all this stuff. And anyone could get it. I think it's like $4 or $5 a bottle, but he makes it homemade. And I think this dovetails with living healthy. I think this dovetails with living a life full of flavor. Like this is an easy add, right, to living a better life. Like it is delicious stuff. And I would recommend you seek out, if not his sauce, something else with some picante to it, like a nice, delicious hot sauce. I think there's nothing better to just kind of, liven up a meal.
I was expecting you to be on, to give us something that was not for the people, but
it was for the people.
That was for the people, and that was
what did you want? Like some Bordeaux or something like that?
Yeah, like some wine that I could never find. But like hot sauce is such a tremendous addition because you can make like rice and stir-fried vegetables, and if you just have the right sriracha or the right hot sauce, it's an amazing dish.
Yeah. I'll say this. Here's a comp for Josh. Josh, if you've ever read the book, the Quarterback Whisperer about Bruce Arians, Josh, you have high taste, you have great taste, but you also are a man of the people. I feel like you sort of have such good range.
Josh prides himself on maximizing like both quality and spend in a really elite way, because you'll never see. Josh hates nothing more. I love how we're just talking about you. Really listen. Yeah. Josh hates nothing more than being punked by overpaying for something.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Okay, so I came from wine, and there's no snootier group of people than you'll ever want to meet. Like, there's no more elitist group of douchebags in the entire world. And the people who make the wine for these douchebags are probably some of the coolest and most salt of the earth folks that you'll ever want to meet. And so there's this weird split, right? And the weirdest part of it is that, like, it is true, you pay more, you get better quality in general, but it's nonlinear and it levels out pretty fucking quick in almost every good. And finding that inflection point the fun of it, right? I think, like, for instance, bourbon. Like, why would you buy a Pappy Van Winkle in the aftermarket for like $1,000 a bottle when you can get the exact same grain bill in the exact same distillery with the exact same oak in a bottle of Weller? And when people discovered it, obviously Weller became harder to get, but the price didn't go up. And I love those guys. And that is, I think, the epitome of being awesome in life. You are, everyone that recognizes you're good. You're not trying to, gouge anyone. You're sold out. The market is telling you in every single way it can that you're mad good. And, you maybe take another $5 a bottle and then you retire. Like, I think that's the way to live life in a reasonable, moral way. And I could probably dovetail the Bitcoin, but we'll probably be here all night.
I would second that. I will tease our Sunday podcast by saying that I will have a recommendation on Sunday of my favorite hot sauces as a connoisseur of the hot sauce market. I'm gonna find. Remind me the name of this gentleman's
Bottle Rocket, I believe, is the name of it. Yeah. Yep. I'll tweet it out after this. So check my feed, and if you're not
checking your feed is
how a big day for rockets.
Checking Josh's feed is how I put myself to bed every single night. So I will look forward to that. But this has been wonderful. We always enjoy having you on the podcast and talking to you when you're not on the podcast. So Josh Hermsmeyer, if you don't follow him, go check him out at Frisco Josh. He does great work at 538. Has a really cool article on Aaron Rodgers chasing rivals, and turns out that it came to fruition. He came back, and maybe part of it was that he was trying to chase Brett Favre. Who knows? Josh, thank you, brother.
Guys, always so great talking to you both. Thanks.
Special thanks to Josh for hanging out with us. That was a really fun conversation. I think we spent a lot of time on the Browns kind of Nick Chubb thing, but it was really interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I still want to I want your opinion on this idea that, like I said, I'm not advocating for it, but I do wonder, is it possible to make plus EV decisions every single move, right? Without ruin happening, meaning you lose your job, right? He talked about how Sashi Brown couldn't read the room, and that was a negative EV play for him as a GM, right? Because there's a human aspect of keeping your job, and there's the winning aspect. Is there because I was advocating, and I brought up the sports betting idea where it's like you only make positive EV bets, but there might be a circumstance where, for example, like a lot of bettors do this, by the way, to make sure that their account doesn't get limited, they'll only bet overs, right, on props that they have. It's
the wrong analogy, but I agree with you. And I think there are a couple of really good analogies. One easy to apply analogy is just like jobs that everyone has every day, right? And that's the boring one. The more exciting analogy is the one that I will use, which is you're married, right?
I'm married. Yep.
I had a girlfriend for a few years. And there are times where in that relationship you go, you know what? I know this isn't the right decision, but a person that I care deeply about and is really important for my happiness kind of feels this way, and it's not that big of a deal. So I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. And when I do really feel strongly and it's something that really matters, I will definitely have that conversation. But if I try having that conversation every fucking time,
it's exhausting.
It's just not going to be happy. And I really appreciate Josh because he stays really faithful to like what is the ideal thing to do in a vacuum, in a perfect world, in a utopian society, but that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, there's also like just like the evolutionary stable state of cooperation, right? Like cooperation is, there are tons of systems like in ecology, for example, where if they're completely deterministic systems, a couple of dominant things win out. And when you make the system stochastic or more random, you add in, environmental stochasticity, for example, the steady state becomes one of cooperation. And I think and this is what I was saying with Josh, is we're not necessarily uncertain about the value of running backs. We may be uncertain about the magnitude. We may be uncertain about other things, right? And so I'm not saying that like the evolutionary stable state is complete cooperation or completely acquiescence to what the running back truthers want. But some, and again, magnitudes here, but some might be viewed by people like Andrew Berry as an acceptable alternative.
Yeah. I don't think we can fault Andrew Berry here. And I think that would be one of my many takeaways that I have. Real quick, a new segment that I'm bringing into the podcast here. It's called Would You Rather.
Oh.
Would you rather sign Baker Mayfield or Lamar Jackson to an extension tomorrow?
Lamar Jackson. So I know that I had, we went back to the podcast. My, 8, 9, and 10 were, and they were the same. I just said them in this order: Baker, Kirk Cousins, Lamar. I do think on average that's they're still the same. Like, I think if you take the average of those guys, you get the same output. But I do think the ruin probability with Lamar is higher. But I think that the probability of winning a Super Bowl with Lamar is higher than Baker Mayfield. And with that, I probably would buy into him. I would wait another season before signing either one of them.
Yeah, that wasn't the question.
Yeah.
If I had to sign one tomorrow, I would 100% sign Lamar Jackson over Baker Mayfield. Because as you said, there is a probability of being in a season the best quarterback that is higher for Lamar than it is for Baker Mayfield. Last, would you rather? Would you rather sign Nick Chubb to a $36 million deal over 3 years, or let him go and replace him with Jeff Wilson?
Of the 49ers? Jeff Wilson's a fine running back. How much am I paying Jeff Wilson? Like
$2 million a year.
Yeah.
Give me Jeff Wilson. I love Nick Chubb, but give me Jeff Wilson.
I mean,
I love Nick Chubb, by the way. If you cut this up and just put that part, make sure you include this. I love Nick Chubb. That was our podcast. We will be back with you on Sunday evening. We love you all. Peace out.